Welcome, everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. We invite you to connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, subscribe to us at Campaign for GLR. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. The webinar will begin shortly. It will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this webinar. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we'd love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. A link to the recording, as well as any resources and slides shared during the conversation, will be shared in a follow-up email to all who registered. We will also be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during closing and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. I also want to call your attention to our upcoming learning and engagement opportunities. Next week on April 18th, we have two exciting sessions when we hope you will join us first at 12:30 Eastern Time for a funder-to-funder conversation focused on kindergarten as a critical time and place for investment to ensure long-term school success. Later that afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we have an exciting session focused on building a parent-centered ecosystem for out-of-school time learning. On the 25th, we hope you'll also join us for Community Engagement Initiative, a framework for sustainable systemic change. We'll be sure to add a link in the chat box for more information and registration for those upcoming learning and engagement opportunities. And lastly, I just wanted to call everyone's attention to our What's Working exchange form. We are gathering information about a few strategies related to learning loss recovery. The form is quick and easy to complete. It takes about 5 to 8 minutes. And the information we gather will help all of us understand what's happening in our communities and support engagement that will unfold later this year. The link to that will be posted in the chat box, and we recommend you pulling that up and opening it in another tab to complete after this webinar is finished. Thank you in advance for doing so. And joining you now is Emily Samos, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra. And hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesday, titled Beyond the ESSER Funding Cliff, Local Supports to Sustain High Impact Tutoring. After last week's extremely interesting and informative conversation exploring how states can support and help create the enabling conditions to scale high impact tutoring, today we are excited to engage in part 2 with Overdeck Family Foundation to explore the local and district support systems that will help sustain the expanded access to tutoring that emerged in response to pandemic learning loss, tutoring that's largely been supported by ESSER funding. Today's discussion also continues our series following on to our session from late last year, when we took some time to follow the money and understand how states and districts are investing that $190 billion in the ESSER fund. The Campaign for Grade Level Reading has long explored tutoring as a worthy big bet that has the potential to make a real impact on equitable learning recovery. And we're looking forward to discussing the essential work needed to sustain this important intervention well beyond the current influx of federal support. We have the opportunity to learn today from tutoring leaders who are partnering with districts to expand and scale their evidence-based programs to reach more students, and discuss what they are doing now to ensure that their work can continue well beyond the 2024 ESSER deadline. We'll explore the school district perspective on what it takes to sustain and how local communities can rally around districts to make sure the expanded tutoring opportunities continue. We will discuss successes and challenges and have a really frank and robust conversation ahead of us. And I'm really excited to introduce our amazing moderator, who will then introduce our panelists and get us going. And I just wanted to note that we did post full bios linked in the chat. So we will just be previewing who we have with us today. So first we have our awesome moderator, Pete Lavarini. He leads the Innovative Schools portfolio at Overdeck Family Foundation, which aims to expand access to tech-enabled, student-centered K-9 learning environments. He's a former 6th grade teacher, and he believes that every child deserves an education that both empowers and connects. So Pete, happy to turn it over to you to take us away.
Well, thanks so much, Emily. It's always fun to be back whenever I get such a kind introduction. I think you're pretty awesome too. I just want to say, speaking of awesome, thank you to all of you for attending today. It is so great to be back here for another conversation to dive deep into the incredible potential that high impact tutoring has for millions of students nationwide. So like the folks at Carnegie, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading at Overdeck Family Foundation, we believe that improving children's opportunities to learn is key to unlocking a better future. And with that lens, the Innovative Schools portfolio that I lead at the foundation is investing in high dosage small group tutoring because we see it as an effective tool for boosting student learning and for increasing student engagement. I don't have to tell the folks on this call that this is an incredibly critical time for educators and administrators at all levels of our education system to gain a deeper understanding of what it's going to take to ensure that high impact tutoring reaches the students that need it. And we have to make sure that it's being effectively implemented so that these programs meet their full potential, and of course, that they can be sustained into the future. Last week, I had the privilege of talking with leaders from Accelerate, the Innovation Project, Saga Education, and the National Student Support Accelerator about what state leaders can do to support the scale and efficacy of high impact tutoring. And just to re-emphasize what high impact tutoring is for the purpose of our conversation today, we learned that high impact tutoring is defined as tutoring that occurs in one-on-one or small group settings from a consistent, well-trained tutor, that it happens 3 or more times a week, that it uses high quality curriculum aligned to what's happening in the classroom, and that it uses data to track student progress and to inform instruction. And we heard from our panelists what some of the most important state level conditions are for scaling effective high impact tutoring, such as providing voluntary guidance based on those tenets of high impact tutoring, implementing data systems to monitor utilization of tutoring programs, and setting up dedicated staffing teams to support implementation. In today's exciting conversation, we're going to go deeper to explore what school and district leaders can do to create the enabling conditions for tutoring to thrive. And I will again reiterate that you have access to the Q&A. Last week's conversation was totally enriched by our audience's questions, and I hope that this group has lots of things to add and to conversation as well. So today, I am again excited to be joined by 4 incredible leaders. First is Horace Badu, who is the Director of District Partnerships with Saga Education, who has more than 18 years of experience in math education. His work in the classroom earned him a designation as a master teacher in 2013, and he's played an instrumental role in shaping mathematics education within the state of Florida. Next is returning champion and fan favorite, Dr. Sharon Contreras, who is the CEO of the Innovation Project in North Carolina, a collaborative of school districts committed to high academic achievement and equity through innovation. Dr. Contreras has held 2 superintendencies, including Guilford County, North Carolina, and is celebrated for implementing policies and practices aimed at improving student-like outcomes. We're excited she's back with us for a second time this week. Nicholas Erber is passionate about helping students achieve their full potential. He's a former teacher, instructional coach, assistant principal, and personalized learning coordinator who currently serves as the director of learning acceleration at the #1 fully IB charter network in Texas named Uplift Education. And Mindy Schoblum is the CEO of On Your Mark, a national tutoring provider of high impact virtual tutoring for early grades literacy. She's also its founder and started the organization with a passion for early literacy and with deep experience building systems to cultivate and develop educators. While preparing to launch On Your Mark, Mindy served as an entrepreneur in residence at the Charter School Growth Fund. And we're going to start today's conversation with Mindy. So Mindy, I'd like to kick things off today with a little bit more about On Your Mark. So can you share a little bit about On Your Mark with our audience and how you partner with schools?
Yes, thanks so much, Pete, and also to the council for inviting us to have this conversation today. I'm really excited to get into some of the nitty gritty details around what makes a really successful tutoring partnership, and excited for this conversation. So thank you for having us today. First, a little bit about On Your Mark. We are, as Pete mentioned, a virtual early literacy tutoring organization. We currently serve 1,400 students in schools in both Texas and in New York. And we'll be focusing a lot today on our partnership with Uplift Education. I'm excited to explain some more about that. And we exist to address the problem that I know a lot of, most folks actually come to this space really concerned about early reading and the literacy rates that we've seen from our students across the country, and the fact that over the last 30 years, nearly 70% of our kids have not been reading on grade level by third grade, and that we know that is a key marker in their future life outcomes, and that we come to this to really ensure that we are able to work alongside schools to ensure that kids are getting the reading instruction that is individualized to exactly what they need, and that they're able to really have successful life outcomes as a result. So our program is designed in the elements that were talked about on last week's webinar, and that Pete mentioned earlier already today through the National Student Support Accelerator. So we're rooted in research. We use an evidence-based curriculum with our tutors to deliver to their students every 4 days a week for 20 minutes a day, and to ensure that we're really able to help accelerate their growth. And indeed, just this past fall in our partnership with Uplift, where we have 1,200 students, we saw our students across all the foundational skills that were being taught and assessed on their DIBELS assessment. We saw our students grow at 2 to 6 times the rate of their non-tutored peers across those skills. So we've seen some really exciting initial data, and I think a lot of that has to do because we have a really great and collaborative school partner in Uplift, and that we have really approached this work together as partners to really make sure that we're able to capitalize on the kind of growth that we know that our kids can make given this type of instruction. And one of the things I think that helps create great partnerships on our side as a provider is that On Your Mark our team is filled with folks who have really deep school experience. We've worked in schools. We understand what it's like to have, a large group of students in front of you with really diverse needs, and then how to want to make sure that we're meeting all of those students' needs, and also how challenging something as small as a little change in 3 minutes in a schedule can actually have cascading impacts across a whole school day and a whole classroom experience. And so I think we really have doubled down on ensuring that we are working shoulder to shoulder with our school partners to design the tutoring schedules and tutoring times that are going to best fit their needs.
Mindy, that's what a great place to start. Given that incredible wealth of experience in schools, and given the incredible impact you've already had on your students across Uplift and here in New York, what can you tell us about the enabling conditions that need to exist at the district or the network level and at the school level for programs like yours to be successful?
Yeah, I thought about this one a lot, and we think a lot about it right now as we're getting ready to scale and starting including new partnerships in our portfolio in the years ahead. And I think one of the things that's most important is that there is a values alignment between the organization and the schools or districts that are being served. And that means that at the highest level, at the CEO or superintendent seat, we need a commitment to high impact tutoring, and to ensuring then that commitment from a values perspective is going to then trickle down to the schools all the way to the teachers. So the teachers understand why it is a key component to accelerating student growth. And then I think second to that is you have to commit resources to it then. It is a resource intense intervention, high impact tutoring is, and accordingly you need to give it, in schools the kind of attention, both financially and then from a people perspective, to make sure that it is done well, is really, really important. And I'm excited that Nick Erber is here with us, because one of the ways that Uplift has made that value statement is by creating a role for Nick to come in and really shape how, across all of the schools at Uplift, that he is able to make sure that tutoring is being implemented really strategically and with fidelity to the programs that they're working with. And then I'd also say then at the school level, we need investment from school leaders. I know of the schools that we are most successful in and where we're seeing the most student growth, the principal believes in the work that is happening between tutors and students, and they have identified who's going to be run point on that at the school level, so that we know that when things come up, as they do in program implementation, that there's going to be support to modify, to make adjustments, and to ensure, most importantly, that kids are consistently connecting with their tutors, because we know that that dosage is so, so important.
That's great. So as you said, we have one of your partners here, Nick Erber from Uplift. And before we, so welcome. And before we actually bring into this conversation, Mindy, I want you to start by talking about your partnership with Nick and the Uplift team and what you set out to accomplish. And I imagine it's going to be very much aligned to that values alignment piece that you just named. So can you talk a bit about that partnership for us?
Totally. I actually think I remember the first time that Nick and I had a conversation. I had this, like, I think I was actually in an airport. Maybe I don't even remember where it was, but we got on the phone. He was new in his role. And we were exploring what a partnership might look like. And really it was getting down into the nitty-gritty details of how we operationalize this together, and also ensuring that when we're getting ready to launch, that we're on the timelines that are consistent with each other, and that we don't push things too fast in a moment, and then create potentially a bad launch situation where then that experience becomes something that people carry with them into future implementation. So when Nick and I first started working together, we actually put the implementation on pause for 4 months to make sure that we were all ready to go, that he had the school ready to go and aligned, and that I had the right tutors aligned and ready and trained, so that we were able to have a really successful launch from start. And I think one of the things that really helped us work successfully together is that we took an opportunity then to pilot at a single site school, where we could really test out how it would work on the ground and see what the initial data was, and then use that information then to really grow champions across the network and to be able to spread the good word into other schools, and really get other folks excited about coming and joining on your mark. And so then we went from serving just one school site with about, I think it was 90 students for the first 10 weeks, and then quickly grew to be in 12 schools and serve 1,200 students across all of Uplift. And I think one of the things that when it comes to values alignment, I think that has really stuck for us between On Your Mark and Uplift is that Uplift is really committed to eradicating that, what I like to call the intervention doom loop. We are focused in kindergarten, first and second grade in our implementation with them, because we want to put resources into early literacy at those times that matter most before third grade, and help support schools at Uplift to be able to get out of having to then intervene consistently ongoing after third grade, when we know we could really just hit it at the source and try to eradicate the need to do that later on.
So great, Mindy. Thank you so much. Nick, turning to you real quick, could you start us off by explaining just a bit more about what Uplift is?
Yeah, so we are a pretty large charter network in North Texas. So we have schools all the way from like West Fort Worth to Far East Dallas. We serve around 23,000 kids at this point. And all of our schools are 100% international baccalaureate. And 100% of the students who have graduated from the schools over our 20-year history, I actually think it's 19 years. It's 19 years of us graduating high schoolers have gone to college or have been accepted to college. So we serve mostly in large urban areas. We also serve around 83% of our students who are free or reduced lunch. So it gives you kind of the idea of the demographic that we're working with in Dallas Fort Worth.
That's great.
We have 45 schools, and Mindy's On Your Mark is in 12 of them.
12 of them. So I'm so glad we asked it, because it sounds like you're already having some pretty incredible results with the students that are in Uplift. So what can you tell us about the results of the work with On Your Mark in particular that you've had so far?
Yeah, so well, like Mindy was saying, they tutor around 4 times a week, 20 minutes a day, over the internet. So about every 10 sessions, scholars are progress monitored, which allows us to keep track of how scholars are progressing throughout their 10-week session. Scholars also take a DIBELS assessment at the beginning and end of each 10-week session, which is what we're about to see on the PowerPoint slide. So I can't see it right now. Is it up yet?
Can we bring up the slides, please? There we go.
All right. So the graph on each of these slides, and this is our kindergarten slide, so we'll start with that, shows scholar progress against the national norm in key literacy skills. So you'll see this bottom like blue line, and the composite score is Uplift, our kindergarten, and the orange line on the top in each of these graphs are the national norm composite scores. So we've got 3 on this slide. We've got the composite, which is all of the different skills that are assessed on the DIBELS assessment, and are kind of are the curricular material that we work with On Your Mark through M-Class literacy bursts. And you'll see, like, you know, we're working with like the most struggling students in our kindergarten, and you can see like the slope kind of goes straight toward that national norm line. So we're trying to close gaps here, and in this case, we've managed to close a pretty significant gap in only 10 weeks of tutoring, both on letter sounds, letter names, as well as our composite score. We can go to the next slide. So our first grade was closer to the national norm, but you can see, especially in phonemic awareness, there's a we've jumped pretty significantly, all the way from, you know, a huge gap there of about 9 points to a gap of about 1 point on phonemic awareness with our first graders who are working with On Your Mark. And these are kids who have attended at least 50% of their sessions with On Your Mark. This is one of the things that you know, we're going to get to a little bit later, but like attendance is key to these kind of interventions and making sure the dosage is there. We can go to the next slide for our second graders. And again, like we see the same kind of trend here. If you come to 50% of the sessions, you work with an On Your Mark tutor in a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-2 context on these proven, you know, M-Class intervention, phonemic, or not phonemic, but intervention bursts, the literacy bursts. You find that the gap closes pretty quickly. We can go to our last slide here. So overall, like the high level takeaways are here is that we found like good attendance is key. And again, like that goes to what Mindy was talking about, and just having a clear line of communication between the district as well as On Your Mark. We've also found that the kids who struggle with literacy the most are the ones who are benefiting the most from tutoring. So we're also participating in a randomized controlled trial with On Your Mark and the National Student Support Accelerator that we hope will show a clear difference between, you know, the scholars who received tutoring and who didn't, as well as the impact of tutor-scholar ratios. Just the early returns from those, I just got about 2 weeks ago, and it's really looking, it's looking really, really promising. It's too early to like draw any like super broad conclusions, but I'm feeling hopeful about it.
Yeah, I mean, looking at these results, I can imagine it's hard. It would be hard not to be hopeful about what we're going to find out this summer from the results of that RCT. Just given, as you know, you pointed out, these gaps are really closing for these students that start off furthest behind, working with On Your Mark and having the conditions necessary for On Your Mark to really thrive can lead to some real gap closures. And so with that, Nick, what do you think? So we heard from Mindy. What do you think are the conditions that contributed the most to the success of On Your Mark? And what did you at Uplift and across your schools do with On Your Mark to make those conditions happen?
Mindy already stole all my answers. I think it's a really great question. Like any successful partnership, I think like has to start with aligned values. So when we were introduced through the Charter School Growth Fund, when they first approached us with this opportunity, it was clear from our conversations with Mindy and her team, as well as the way that they were planning the work, they understood what it took to provide like high quality instruction to scholars. And that was very clearly demonstrated in just the fact that like her team were seasoned pros at working with schools and working in schools. From the core values alignment like standpoint, it all kind of just cascades from there. It really is a matter of like bringing schools in and collaborating with them to understand what works for their schedule, for getting kids logged in for this stuff, and for getting like admin and teacher buy-in. On Your Mark, it like was and continues to be super collaborative in this regard. Compared to some of the for-profit and frankly less successful tutoring programs that we've worked with, they were like realistic about the timeline, like Mindy was saying, and then they were realistic about how much planning, just how much planning and how much like coming together around this very specific goal of getting our K-2 students reading on grade level 4 times a week, would take.
Great. And so what comes next for the On Your Mark and Uplift partnership? What do you hope to implement to make this program even more powerful for your students?
Yeah, so from Uplift's standpoint, the little like iteratively adjusted things really make a huge difference. Especially, schools are complicated things, right? There are a lot of like small things that can really throw your day off as a principal or as a teacher or as a student. And so like On Your Mark, being able to like understand and adjust to those things, really being flexible around them has been super helpful. I think like going into this next example from this last semester, On Your Mark's platform partner, Pearl, was able to integrate fully with ClassLink earlier this year, which allowed our kindergartners who, if you've ever met a kindergartner at a Chromebook, they're not very good at putting in login information. They were able to put their, they were able to get into their tutorials through quick cards. We also hope to expand like the transition times between tutorial sessions, which was like a main point of feedback from almost all of our schools. I'd say like the other thing that we're working on and that Aaron, who is their senior director of partnerships, by the way, I just like have to shout out Aaron. He's amazing. He is on top of everything. He handles all, and this is like their point person for Uplift. He handles all of the day-to-day tracking, communication with schools, most of the problem solving, and the work just wouldn't be, we wouldn't be able to do the work without him. We're pretty lean at Uplift, like most CMOs, and I'm more or less a one-person team. So there's no way we could do this kind of work without really, really high class support from On Your Mark. But to that being said, Aaron has been really responsive about like building teacher buy-in, and we're looking at more systematic ways to make sure that all of our stakeholders, students, parents, teachers, admin, really clearly understand and are bought into the kind of proven work that's going on here.
That's phenomenal. Mindy, Nick, thank you so much for sharing so much about your partnership. We're going to come back to you. I would love to, in particular, I'd love to, at the end of the conversation, when we have time for Q&A, learn more about how you're collectively going to be approaching building that buy-in, because it is so critical. But speaking of seasoned pros, I want to turn now to Horace from Saga. Horace, can you first just start by giving us a sense of what Saga Education is, how you partner with districts and schools to implement high impact tutoring?
So thank you, Pete, for having me. I'm really honored to be a part of this panel. So Saga Education is an organization that supports schools and school districts and state leadership departments in executing high dosage tutoring through the power of relationships and the power of high impact tutoring that we have definitely honed and we have sort of perfected, and we're still on that track to make better, but we utilize our knowledge and expertise to support our districts and our schools in about 5 basic buckets. So we first start off by supporting them with program design. So we help them to design an effective high impact tutoring model that is fully tailored to their school's needs, and to help school leaders really understand how to address some of those key implementation factors such as scheduling or logistics or student selection and frequency, as well as dosage. We also help to consult with staffing needs. We know that the success of any high impact tutoring program will depend on your ability to attract the most qualified and the best tutor applicants that will reflect the students that are being served. So we help schools to guide them in direction for recruitment with some job descriptions that we have come up with. We help with hiring best practices and additional support when hiring tutors and or tutor leaders. We also do pre-service trainings for our tutors and our tutor leaders who oversee and manage the tutoring program. The tutors get training on high yield strategy in topics such as relationship building, collaborative learning, and maintaining rigor. The tutor leaders also get training on topics ranging from how to lead a debriefing to how to conduct quality tutorial observations. We also support tutor training in 2 different ways. We have our asynchronous training, which is through our Saga Coach platform, which is actually free for anyone to use. And then we have our synchronous trainings that we schedule through Zoom. The other bucket that we support schools in is providing high quality instructional materials. So our Saga curriculum ranges from 6th grade math to Algebra 2, and it's been intentionally designed for a tutorial context and is usable by any tutor, regardless of their experience. And we support schools in aligning our material to what they're already using in the classroom. And we train schools on how to effectively use our curriculum as a lesson plan for their tutorials. And by the way, our curriculum is offered for free to anyone who would like to use it. And the last bucket, I would say, is our quality assurance. We know that the most effective tutoring programs have ongoing coaching to analyze the progress and to improve methodologies. So we support schools by tracking internal metrics to just evaluate and maintain the program fidelity and figure out the impact. And after the program is launched, we also work alongside the schools and the districts to address challenges that may come up. We observe tutorials and provide actionable feedback to ensure that the schools are really implementing effective tutoring strategies throughout the year to get those high yield outcomes that they want to see. It's been said that this work is maybe challenging, but once we grapple with some of those challenges and we just overcome and address them, the results are astronomical. And I am so happy to be a part of an organization that really takes this work seriously and has made such an impact over the last 15 to 20 years.
Yeah, Horace, I think there's some links in the chat to some of Saga's impact over the years. If you haven't had a chance to read this, it's so impressive, and it really speaks to the leadership and commitment that you, Horace, and the rest of the Saga team have at solving this problem of accelerating math learning for all students. So, Horace, you mentioned a lot of ways in which Saga supports and partners with schools. I'm curious, this is a conversation about the conditions that need to be true for all of that work to be successful and actually pay off. So can you share with us what you've learned are the most important conditions, most critical conditions for success for high impact tutoring at the school level? And can you give us examples of like what schools and districts have done in order to create those conditions?
Certainly. Firstly, Mindy did a phenomenal job in touching on this topic, and so did Nick. So I was thinking of some other things that I could bring to this question that were not necessarily spoken about earlier. So I'm going to address some of the really important things that are often either overlooked or taken for granted. So the first thing is just having a target or focus area and then knowing why you are prioritizing that area. A lot of schools may recognize a need, but within any school, there might be 10 or 20 or 30 things that to do. So why are you targeting this particular area? Is it because you want to increase graduation rates? Are you wanting to improve your outcomes on state testing? It's really important to ground the school and think about the resources that would be needed to be prioritized and the capacity that they would need in order to effectively address their target area. So the first thing is to know what you're targeting, know who you're targeting, and why. The second thing is making sure that your goal is for your tutoring program to be independent regular school operations. This really smart guy and a Harvard education researcher.
Wait, Horace, real quick, could you restate what that was? I think you went out a bit for your internet. It felt very important. Could you just say what the second thing is?
I'm sorry. So the second thing is making sure that your tutoring program can run independently from the regular school operations. So I was about to say that a really smart education researcher from Harvard, he says that the challenge posed by taking intervention programs to scale is largely proportional to the degree of behavioral change required to implement the program. So when a tutoring program is running independently of the regular school operations, that doesn't a lot of behavioral change from the classroom teachers or administrators, and there's much more buy-in and support. Now, independently doesn't mean running in isolation. There's still a lot of communication and collaboration that would take place between tutors and teachers, but the process isn't something that's outside of what is normally done. The other thing that is really important to have in place, a capable and coachable staff member to lead the tutoring initiative at the school. So a capable staff member will bring expertise and experience to the program. A capable should also have strong leadership skills to be able to inspire and motivate tutors and students alike to fully engage in the program and achieve its goals. And a coachable staff member will be open to feedback, willing to learn, being receptive to making necessary changes to the program over time. We know that successful programs require a lot of ongoing evolution and adaptation based on the feedback, the data, and the change. So having a coachable staff member will be a really valuable asset in this regard. And then overall, choosing capable and coachable staff members will really facilitate that establishment of a strong collaborative culture around the program. And then they will be able to build those relationships with teachers, parents, and the students, and really foster that positive and supportive environment that helps a program like this to thrive. And then the last thing I will say, actually, I may have two more things. So for middle school and high school students, or middle school and high school should prioritize high impact tutoring as part of the school schedule of classes with its own time block, as opposed to a pull-out or a push-in interventions within their math course or an elective course, because it does a few things. Firstly, it ensures that the tutoring is a dedicated and consistent part of that student's routine, rather than just an optional or supplemental activity that can be easily missed Secondly, it does allow for more focused and intensive approach to the tutoring, and the tutors have time and more flexibility to tailor the instruction and support each student's specific needs. And also, lastly, integrating the tutoring as part of the student's schedule also signals to the student and their family that the school values that prioritization of their academic success. And that also helps them motivate and engage the students in their learning. And I'll say one more thing. Having a goal of parental support as well as community support is very essential to having a sustainable program. Firstly, parents are really important stakeholders in their child's education, and then they can really play a huge critical role in motivating and supporting their child's participation in the program. And when they know the benefits of the program, they're more likely to encourage their kids to participate and to really engage in those supportive behaviors we want to see. Secondly, the parent support can really help foster and build a broader community awareness, especially when the parents are enthusiastic about the program. They may share with other parents, community organizations, or local businesses, and that really helps to generate more interest and investment from a community standpoint. And lastly, parental support and engagement can also create opportunities for program expansion and sustainability. Like when the parents are invested, they may be more likely to engage with the district or seek additional pathways to support the sustainability at a school level, especially when they're seeing the impact.
Horace, so one, thank you for the exhaustive, like very meaty checklist of things that are here. Again, it just shows to the depth of experience you've working with these partners, and many things we're going to come back to. But I think mostly, even though you work in middle schools and high school, Horace, like the target area focus, integration in the school day, making sure there's a capable leader there, all of those things seem to be critical for any grade level or any subject area they choose, not just middle school or high school math, but also I think really aligns well to what Mindy and Nick were saying is what was necessary for the early literacy tutoring too. So thank you for that context. Incredibly informative. We're going to come back to you in just a bit when we talk more about this question of sustainability. But before we do that, I'd like to turn now to Sharon Contreras from the Innovation Project. Sharon, last week you told us a bit about the tutoring initiatives you began in Guilford County and the successes you had here. But I'm wondering, could you remind us of what the conditions that were at both the school and the district level were, and particularly those that were most critical to the success of the tutoring initiatives? I'd love to really know also, which of those were the most difficult or most challenging to create?
Yeah, so thank you for having me again. I'd like to say I'm now the CEO of the Innovation Project, and Dr. Whitney Oakley, who's the Deputy Superintendent in Guilford County, is now the superintendent, and she is continuing this great work that she spearheaded as the deputy. You know, when the pandemic first happened, we knew we had to do something. So initially, the tutoring was outside of the school day. We did learning hubs and after school tutoring, before school tutoring. And we were trying to really provide as many students as possible with the support they needed. But we decided immediately and determined immediately that we needed a division within the school system that focused on tutoring as their only function. And I think it is very, very difficult to do this work if there is not a division that focuses on this as their primary and sole job function. And so we formed that division, and it has expanded. The division has expanded as the number of tutors and the tutoring programs have expanded across the district. And we also thought about where to begin. So we started initially with the principals we felt at the high school level who were problem solvers and who were most willing. And so within, I would say, weeks, other high school principals came on board, and eventually, I would say all 28 high school principals were participating, and then we expanded to middle school and then to elementary. But there were some non-negotiables there. One, and this made it a little bit more of an expensive model for us. We made sure that we prioritized the teacher-tutor partnership. Tutors in Guilford County meet weekly with the assigned classroom teacher to anticipate misconceptions and to ensure the tutoring sessions are in fact tutoring to close skill gaps, to accelerate learning, and not to do homework help, which is a key difference in many of the tutoring models we've seen. And we talked last week about that people often ask, well, what's different here? Because tutoring has existed for decades. This is much more strategic, I would say. We also ensure that tutors are trained on district curriculum and high quality instructional materials. So in GCS, we mandated, and Dr. Oakley continues to require, prerequisite training in curriculum materials, also on ethics, on how to work with children, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, as well as the tutors must participate in ongoing PLCs. And there are ongoing observations of tutoring sessions when students were out of school. This was done remotely. And now that the tutoring sessions are integrated into the school day, the tutors are observed, the tutoring sessions are observed. They're observed by peers, they're observed by classroom teachers, they're observed by administrators, and they're observed by some of our technical assistance partners that also coach teachers, so they receive coaching. We were also intentional about the selection of our tutor-tutee pairings with the help of an algorithm developed by our Chief of Accountability. We identified students who needed tutoring the most, considering multiple factors for not graduating on time. Even if they were elementary students, we determined who was most at risk. And we worked to ensure that the most highly trained tutors, the most highly effective teachers were paired with those tutors, students who were most vulnerable. So for example, the students who are incarcerated have the most highly effective teachers now. That had never happened before. The students who lack permanent housing have the most highly effective teachers and the graduate assistants. We also leverage the university partnerships and have 200 graduate assistants who work with us. We pay their tuition and we pay the graduate assistantship using ESSER funds. And they work, their 20 hours a week goes toward tutoring and working in those PLCs and working with the classroom teacher to make sure that they are actually tutoring students on what they need. I think what was most difficult to set up was just managing all of these partnerships and getting tutors who were retirees, getting tutors from industry, managing the university partnerships. It was something we hadn't really done before. Tutoring was done at the school level and generally with school-based funds, and the principals handled that. So trying to manage all of this, managing the coaching of the tutors, the training of the tutors, especially ethics training, just really introducing them to the school experience was new for us, and it was new for them. It was a very heavy lift, and it's still a very heavy lift for us.
Yeah, I can imagine doing all that too in the midst of a pandemic, in the beginning of a pandemic, just probably added to that there. So you named, Sharon, a few times paying for expensive. So can you share a bit about how you did pay for this, how you did pay for this, and how you, or what your understanding is how Dr. Oakley or some of the other superintendents you're working with are paying for high impact tutoring?
Yeah, so we immediately identified $3 million per year in ESSER funds for tutoring, and we held that sacred. So, there were districts that were, giving all of their funds as retention bonuses, and that was very important to try to hold on to your staff. But it was equally important to us to make sure our students had support. So we tried to find a good balance there. And no matter what, we work with the board to say, you have to have employees, you have to have bus drivers, we need our teachers to stay, but the General Assembly has to help with that. We can't do this all with the ESSER fund. So we held that funding as sacred. And so we had that $3 million a year. Then we also worked with our Congressperson, Kathy Manning, who brought in an additional $2 million. So we just started seeking funding. And then, some private foundations helped us. And then for the research piece, because we wanted to know what was working, we were doing learning hubs. We started integrating the tutoring into the school day. We were doing before school tutoring, after school tutoring, and we still do all of those things there. We wanted to know what works. We started working with Annenberg and Brown University to actually do the research, not at cost to the district. We still have a long way to go. We're hopeful that the work we're doing will serve as proof of concept in North Carolina and across the country, so that more money will come in, not just for Guilford County, but for districts across the state, the 115 school districts across the state, and will be fully funded by the General Assembly. And we're hopeful that more money will come in from the federal government for tutoring, because of districts that are really implementing and doing the research to analyze what is working for students.
Thank you, Sharon, for that. Nick, I want to bring you in here too as a district leader. How are you paying for it, and what advice do you have for others that are looking for ways to pay for high impact tutoring?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo Sharon's statement about ESSER funding. We were, the ESSER program requires that you spend 20% of your entire ESSER funding on learning loss recovery, and high impact tutoring's the way that Uplift has decided that they're going to use those federal dollars, that 20% of our funding. So I think we really had an unprecedented opportunity to kind of change the way that intervention is done in our schools, and we used ESSER to pay for that. As far as the biggest piece of advice around, I'm not the superintendent of Uplift Education. I'm a director. So I have a boss and she has a boss, and that's the CEO of Uplift. So I mean, really just the biggest piece of advice for district leaders in this is just really manage up and know your manage up and across, and know the folks who are decision makers and who you have to convince that this is a good idea. I was really fortunate in that my boss and our president and our CEO, all three are super data driven, and they understood the promising research and this type of intervention. And so we were able to use the funds pretty straightforwardly. Also, I'm kind of tenacious about getting things through whatever kind of bureaucracy we have. You really have to ask and then ask again, and then go to their desk and stand next to their desk until they get done what you want them to get done. But all to say, you really have to believe in it, and you have to manage up and make sure other folks believe in it. And finally, just this really doesn't have much to do with On Your Mark, but with other vendors, because we really went the route because we wanted to get this to scale quickly and effectively, because the need is so great. and we wanted to make sure that kids got what they needed quickly. There are a lot of statewide initiatives to allow large purchases under ESSER without doing an RFP. I would say do the RFP because like you end up getting better contracts. You end up having like more control over like what goes in the service agreement, and it just like leads to more clarity on both ends of the vendor side as well as the district side.
That's such a sharp insight there. You know, sometimes it's important, I think, for all of us to really think about that quality matters here, and taking the time to ensure that quality, price isn't the only factor here, and quality is just as important. And taking the time to make sure that your district and others understand that and are bought into how important that decision is. Great. Horace brought up a really important point earlier around parental and family and broader community support. And I'd actually again like to take Sharon and then Nick. I'd like for you to weigh in on this too. So Horace talked a bit about why family and community engagement is so critical for student success. What do you, Sharon, believe that families and community members can do to ensure that these in-school high-impact tutoring programs are most impactful?
Yeah, you know, before we even had the data about the learning loss in math, the parents told us that. You know, the parents gave us that information along with the students. And, you know, I think it's really important that we listen to the voices of our parents when they're telling us how students are struggling. You know, maybe they're not speaking in the language of the assessment report, but they see what's happening at the kitchen table at night. And they can give us some very valuable insight about that. I think the other thing that really happened for us, and Horace hit upon this, was they were very pleased for the most part with the tutoring. And they became the biggest advocates for helping us in terms of recruiting others throughout the community. So they recruited other parents to, you know, who might be hard to find, difficult to reach, to say, hey, your child can benefit from this tutoring. All you have to do is sign up here. And they would send the link and put it on social media and share this in, you know, community, in the faith communities. They also helped us to recruit the tutors at their places of employment, and many of the parents became tutors themselves. Some that might have been hesitant and said, well, I can't tutor. Actually, they did have the skills and the knowledge to tutor. And I just think we underestimate the knowledge, skill, the power that the parents have to actually catapult our programs to the next level in public schools. And I think this really taught us how much you know, value, additional value parents could add to addressing this issue of learning recovery, specifically with math education.
Sharon, I'm sitting here just smiling and nodding my head. That's wonderful. I think it's so right. The ways, and I think it speaks glowingly of the tutoring initiative that you led there, and that really the broader Guilford County approach to this, that you saw parents as partners in this work. It's really phenomenal. Nick, what can you add to this? How are you seeing family and community engagement enabling the success of the work with On Your Mark?
Yeah, you know, so all of our tutoring programs, from On Your Mark to our in-person programs, are 100% during school hours. So we schedule during school days so that we don't have to ask for parent opt-in, and we don't have to run and we don't like run into transportation issues because we don't have buses. Our schools are all over the Metroplex, and our student population just lives in all kinds of different neighborhoods all across the Metroplex. That being said, like schools, our schools like typically have pretty strong relationships with their families. parents like choose Uplift Education. And I can say from my time as an assistant principal with the network that parents are typically like want to understand and are super involved in their scholars' educations. You know, I spent most of my time as an administrator just talking to parents, making sure they understood what was going on in the classroom, especially during the pandemic. So I mean, like, really, it is just a matter for us of making sure that like parents are looped in, they understand like what the plan is for On Your Mark and for any of our tutoring programs, and then get your kid to school. Like, make sure you have your kid in school, make sure they're coming to school when they are not sick. Because I know like nationally, that's just like, that's been a huge problem for a lot of districts, and you know, we're no exception. Attendance rates across the board have just dropped off since the pandemic.
Yeah, and just to tie that back to the incredible data you shared earlier, Nick, the power of high impact tutoring just grows as the students receive more tutoring sessions, right? I think we saw that from the data, and seeing heads nodding from the other folks on the call. So I'm glad I'm not out of skis on that. I do think the research shows us pretty clearly that the more sessions students attend, the more impacts there. All right, so we got 2 questions left before we open this up to Q&A. So please keep the questions coming, audience. The questions you've asked so far are really thought-provoking. I'm excited to get to them. But first one, and so these are all plays. So these are questions for all of our panelists. First one is, we know that tutoring, high impact tutoring, is most impactful when it's integrated into the school day. But we also know that the nuts and bolts of integration, like scheduling, student attendance, et cetera, can be really challenging. What has worked for you to make sure that tutoring is integrated into the school day? And what should other school leaders consider as they approach this work? Let's start with Horace.
All right, that is a great question, and a question that we're all grappling with on a constant basis. But based on my work and my experience with the schools that we serve and the districts that we serve, I'm just going to start with just keeping the stakeholders involved and informed. Firstly, just to bring home the point about the parent communication, we do recommend that just having tutors call home to introduce themselves to the parents goes a long way, providing updates to the parents and to the guardians about how the students may be progressing during the tutorial time, and also for teachers to, when they speak to the parents, help them to see in the classroom problem. So if they can drive that point home when they have their up. I think I'm breaking up. Can you all hear me?
You're breaking up a bit, Horace. You might maybe I hate to ask you to do this. Do you want to try going on video for a bit and repeating your point, just in case that helps with the?
Okay, I'll do that again. So I'm not sure what you heard, but I started off with talking about the parent involvement again, just reaffirming that, and how teachers. Okay, then for the teaching staff, it's really important for the school leaders to engage the teaching staff to make sure that they are aware of the tutorial program at their school, share the schedules, making time for the tutor leads and the teachers to connect so they can form those relationships early. And also for the students, letting the students know about tutorial, creating a space where the students can ask questions about it to learn more about how it's going to benefit them, encouraging those elements of joy and personalization throughout those tutorial sessions so that they can have a positive impression about the tutorial. That's one way. The other way I would say is just having a designated tutorial space, which is ideally in a classroom. You know, having a teacher of record there to monitor what's going on in the tutorial space really goes a long way, because they can collect those quantitative metrics, such as those student attendance records or lesson pacing or groupings, how those are working, or even the qualitative metrics, such as just how students are feeling in the tutorial. The students are going through at home that may be hindering them from being fully engaged in tutorials. You know, I think having that designated space with a teacher, just making sure that you are intentional about student selection. Not every intervention program is right for every student. So just making sure that you have metrics in place to determine if your implementation of high impact tutoring is right for the students that you want to impact. And last but not least, just making sure that you're considerate about how you can be flexible with your schedule of classes. If you are a high school, you can build that in as an elective course, or maybe a double block content area course, maybe an intervention period, or even an additional core course for credit. If you are scheduling cohorts that all travel together throughout the day, allows a lot of flexibility to build in that tutoring time into the schedule. And since we talked about elementary students earlier, I'm just going to add this period, or using some time like guided reading time for tutorial could be a way of just incorporating that time. The tutors may be in their rooms with children in one room, and then the space in another room with the teachers, so that they. So I think those are some key things that I feel would help scheduling and tutorial attendance.
Great, Horace. Thank you. Mindy, what would you add?
Just to build off it, I think I wrote down on a Post-it here something that Horace said earlier, because it was really meaningful to me too, in the way that we approach and think about scheduling during the school day, that he said it's got to be a part of a process that's not outside of the regular school operations. And that kind of collaboration with schools for us has been key, and really like getting into the weeds with teachers around how this best fits and makes sense, especially as a virtual tutoring organization. What do we replace? What do we fit in as? And how are we helping teachers best understand that as a part of the regular school day instead of as something extra or an add-on? Because the better that, better we're able to integrate our tutoring into what's happening in a regular school schedule, the more likely we're going to see tutors and connecting with their students on a regular basis. And so for us, to the point where we fit mostly in literacy blocks, where students would usually be going to another tech-enabled product as a part of a station rotation. Instead, many students end up going to meet their tutor during that time virtually, and that we're able to really connect consistently with kids in that way. And I'd also just add that the communication with teachers is really, really important, and something that we've been continuing to work with Nick and the folks at Uplift on is, what's the right level? Because there's this, we're incredibly data-based, and we want to make sure that we are providing teachers with data that's also going to be helpful for their instruction. And we also don't want to overwhelm them with data that isn't meaningful or doesn't make sense based on what their current instructional program is. And so we've tried a lot of things. We've shared too much. We've shared not enough. And we're coming, I think, into this sweet spot in the center where being able to be really specific about individual students with their teachers has been really helpful, where our tutors give a narrative response after every 2-week progress monitoring cycle to be able to describe student learning and student engagement and the relationship, building that they're doing, as well as the quantitative growth that they're seeing, or if they're staying stagnant on a specific skill, that teachers are able to get that information so they can then use that in their own instructional planning to make sure that they're following up on those things with their students as well. And one of the ways our scope is a little bit different is all of our tutors are virtual. And so we've been trying to figure out what parent engagement best looks like. And I think the sweet spot we found right now is to be able to provide really tangible and digestible progress reports that we then pass along to the schools, who then we use the teachers to be the ones to disseminate that information directly to parents as the ones who most directly own those relationships, and not our tutors as the virtual tutoring providers, because our tutors might be working in four different Uplift schools with a different caseload of students at each spot. So that's something that we're continuing to work on and figure out, and we think is really important to make sure that parents understand what's going on.
Phenomenal. I really appreciate the way, Mindy, you just built off of Forrest's point. And what I'm really excited about is how also, Mindy, you were able to build off of what Sharon talked about how Sharon, you at Guilford County really talked about bringing the tutors and the teachers together regularly to ensure that communication around what student needs were So love, I just, these common themes are really, I hope our audience is really seeing that there are these things that are showing up time and time again to make this work successful. Sharon, anything to add about what schools and districts can do in order to really make sure that tutoring is integrated into the school day?
Yeah, I would just say, in the same vein, we say do no harm with doctors. In medicine, I would say the same in education. One thing I'm often concerned about is that we go back to the old days where we give all this additional support, but we take away the arts, we take away career technical education, and we take away joy. And I don't want schools to be joyless places like it is for so many students. And, I think about the times we've taken away physical education in poor schools so that a student can have tutoring. And we don't think about Black and brown girls have the highest rates of obesity in the country, or we take away computer science and robotics when 7 of 10 jobs that Black males are currently in will be erased because of AI. We have to be really careful. And if we don't expose children to the arts, they will never see beauty in the world. So we have to advocate for reimagining schools, reimagining the school day, the school week, the school year, getting rid of seat time, moving more toward competency-based learning so that students can have the support they need with high impact tutoring, but also be involved in the programming they need and enjoy so they can be successful in life. And it's not just a school day where they take math courses, math tutoring, English classes, and then ELA tutoring. There's more to school than that. And that's really important that we learn from the mistakes we've made in prior decades and give children the schools they actually need and deserve.
Yes. Yeah. Nick, what do you want to build off of what Sharon said? I mean, that's great.
Yeah, so I mean, to Sharon's point, I think it's really interesting. The Texas legislature, which is convening, right now, but last session, we only convene every 2 years here in Texas, passed a law that says, if you have failed a STAR test or an EOC test, then your school is required to give you 30 hours of supplemental instruction in a group of 3 to 1. And you can't take students out of recess, you can't take them out of enrichment, you can't take them out of any kind of like core content. And so like when we approach this work, we were, it doesn't govern K through 2, it only governs 3 through 12. But when we were approaching this work, we really came at it with that same idea of like, we really want to make schools a special place where like humans can flourish, and we just start like producing a reading and math machines, right? So with that in mind, I found that like design and collaboration are really, really key in making these big decisions about how we go about getting this extra programming into schools. So I ran design studios and ran empathy interviews for about a semester before we even started any of this high impact tutoring work. So I mean, just like making sure that you're listening to folks and making sure that you have formal structures in place to make sure that you can build what actually will work within the context of the building is like the highest priority. That and making sure that people can trust you, just building that trust and following through on what you say, and making sure that other folks follow through on what they say on the vendor side, and making sure that you are like that people really feel like the management of this from a central level is both competent and has their best like interests at heart.
Team, this has already been such an incredibly rich conversation. And I just want to say, on behalf of Overdeck, already so incredibly grateful for everything you've added to this. And particularly the continued emphasis on thinking about what's really best for the student in these cases, and how can we sort of think about holistically what does the student need, and how can we as our systems be really designed around what they need. And hearing that through all of the concepts and through all of you. So we're going to turn now to some audience Q&A. And again, thanks again for everybody for adding your questions into the chat. We're going to try to answer as many as we can. I want to start with this question from one of our anonymous attendees. It's around how school districts now are selecting more of the homework help programs instead of high impact tutoring. Mostly, I think, because many of these districts are focused on scale and having a solution for every student in their district, perhaps. Even though we know some of these programs aren't having great hit rates in terms of the number of students that are actually using it. And so I'm curious, Horace, maybe we can start with you. As you're talking to district partners, can you hear me? Nope, you are muted a bit. Okay, so Mindy, let's go with you first, and then we can see if we can get the technology to work out here. What are you finding in your conversations with district leaders about this question, and how are you going about talking to districts and about sort of the trade-offs and why it's really much more important to think about high impact tutoring versus some of the alternative models that are out there at this point in time?
This is such a great question. And I think when we first started, we were up against a lot of these homework help or tutoring on demand programs, and really we're in a position where we had to figure out how to differentiate ourselves from those. And from my perspective, it's all about leading with data. And it was hard at first because we didn't have the data stories to tell yet. When we were first all responding to the pandemic with tutoring as what was going to be a really impactful response to learning loss. And we didn't have the data. Saga had been around and they had strong data. The studies were already being done, but there wasn't a large scale movement to try to figure out how this would be a solution to a problem that was also exacerbated by the pandemic. And so from my perspective, it's leading with data. I know there was a great article that Susanna Loeb out of NSSA authored around these homework help type programs, being able to share those with district leaders of like, yes, it's a great resource for kids who use it and then use it consistently over time, but it isn't having the reach that they are expecting. And when it comes to parents, to be able to tell the specific story of student learning based on high impact tutoring is incredibly meaningful. I had an opportunity to be in Dallas last week at one of our school sites and got to meet with a parent of one of our students. And the way that she described the change that had taken place in her daughter and the way that she talked about tutoring at home was something that you can't replicate without the ongoing relationship that a tutor is forming with their student through high impact tutoring, and then the academic results that go along with that. So I'd say it's all about making sure we're centering those conversations in the real academic and social emotional data that we're gathering.
That's great, Wendy. And Mindy, the other thing I would add to this is what I think that part of this answer is what I heard from Sharon and what I heard from Horace and what I heard from Nick and heard from all of you is not all students are necessarily a good fit for high impact tutoring, or necessarily need high impact tutoring, right? And some students, their needs in the moment can be met by some of those on-demand tools. And so, but I think many of the same lessons we've heard today around strong communication between parents and providers and strong communication between classrooms and tutors can go a long way to ensuring that all tutoring systems can work for all students. But for this instances, really what we're talking about around this high impact work is super critical. Do you want to add something, Mindy?
No, I would just say it's about fit, right? Like we're not going to address all problems, or like in medicine, we're not going to address all wounds with the same type of interventions, right? A small Band-Aid works for a scrape, but it's not going to work for something that needs sutures. And so that's why having a diversity of programs is great, but then really thinking about what is the need that we are looking to meet, and then what is the best match from an intervention perspective and what that need is, and how are we using data to be able to drive our decisions around how we are making those choices for kids.
That's great. Okay, so we had a question in the chat that I also thought was weird, because so many of you talked about buy-in and district leadership really, and school leadership and classroom leadership really buying into this vision. And Sharon, I want to talk to you. I want to bring you in on this as sort of the leader, right? Maybe some folks on our call aren't leading school districts, but they're the ones sort of making the case for why high impact tutoring should work. Maybe they're the ones that are working with superintendents or school leaders to really figure out how to work. What advice do you have for those folks who are providing, sort of doing the work on the ground, about how to approach a conversation with leaders when they may have sort of a very specific idea of what they want, when maybe they need to be a bit more flexible or a bit more able to work with their partner around seeing what can actually pay off for this work?
So I think it's really important to make the case with data, and it's very powerful. I've sat in, I would say, hundreds of board meetings over the course of my 12 years as a superintendent. And you can hear, like, when data is presented, the audible gasp sometimes when you finally make that case, like, this is what is happening in schools to our children. And then you make the case for, there's a limited pot of money, and we have to employ the strategies that are most likely to work based upon the research. And we can't be the industry that says we're going to just employ any old strategy based on what's most popular. They don't do that in medicine. They don't do that in other industries. We have to use our resources wisely. And that doesn't mean that we can't innovate, like we can't try some new things, but it does mean we have to use the research that makes sense, that is evidence-based. And I think for most people, they buy into that. We didn't have a lot of problems with convincing teachers that students needed tutoring, that we had to use resources on high impact tutoring, that we needed better materials, curriculum and instructional materials. We didn't have a difficult case with the Board of Education. We didn't even have a difficult time in the community. I think it's when you have a limited pool of resources and you have other needs, like, so for districts that also had facilities needs, that became like a competing interest. What do we do about air quality and those sort of things? So you have to rally people to say, this is going toward tutoring, and we need the city council to help with air quality issues in schools, and we need this group to help with technology. You just have to have a plan to make sure all of those competing issues are met. But in terms of a strategy, for an instructional strategy or a strategy to assist students so that we can accelerate learning and that they graduate and they're doing well. I think we have enough research and we have enough evidence, and we just have to make the case publicly, and we have to do it over and over again. There are people who can say what I say. My principals could say what I said. There were parents who could repeat what I said. There were leaders in the faith community who would say, Dr. Contreras said. You just keep saying it and keep saying it until everybody embraces that.
And I would like to add something to that, if I may, Pete. So in addition to the quantitative data, and sometimes even the qualitative data that we collect to just show the effectiveness of high impact tutoring, I think it's really important for schools to document anecdotal stories of impact too, because it's really important when the decision makers are in a room. Yes, it's great to see the data and the effectiveness, but people are moved to decide to do something when they can connect with a story that that shows acceleration, that shows progress, or shows how a student was able to get from one level to the next based on this intervention. And if you collect enough of those to tell a story and paint a picture about the importance of this intervention at that particular school or learning institution, that's also, that really helps to make that impact on those decision makers who have the access to the purse, who have the access to some of those levers that would need to be pulled to make sure that this happens. And also making sure that the implementation or this program is linked specifically to some strategic goal that the district has. When there's that alignment as well, it doesn't mean that's going to be easy, but at least you have the ducks in the row that you need to have, that impact that you want to have on the decision making.
That's great. I love the emphasis on data. We're going to get to this two points about data. First is data. Audience, you now have a survey that's just popped up. Please complete that. The campaign takes your answers to the survey very seriously, so please complete that if possible. And the second question around data, it's building a bit off of David's question from the Q&A around how do we know this is working in the meantime, right? So we have all this big data that Sharon talked about, Horace talked about around, really can make the case that this is the lever to pull to accelerate student learning in this moment. But Nick, let's kick this to you first. Like, what are you monitoring day to day or week over week to ensure that this is actually paying off and you're getting the results that you want?
Yeah, so I'd say for like the last spring semester, about a year ago, we were not very good at monitoring data across all of our programs. On Your Mark being the exception, because they built in, progress monitoring every 2 weeks. We were just trying to get as much tutoring to students as possible. But as we moved into like this year, we've standardized our data systems so that we can see who's getting tutoring, when they're getting tutoring, and therefore we can like run a data analysis at the end of our first semester. We can run a data analysis at the end of our next semester. But to specifically like on Your Mark's point, Mindy like wrote it out there. They do progress monitoring every 2 weeks, and they the way that M-class intervention works, the skills that students are working on or the instructional approach is adjusted based on those 2 weeks of data and seeing where kids are. So it's very, very responsive to data, to like the data collected in those progress monitoring dates. So I mean, for On Your Mark specifically, we're really looking at DIBELS. We're really looking at that M-class intervention progress monitoring. For our other programs, we're looking at MAP data because we do beginning, middle, end of year MAP for all of our, I believe, second graders through 10th graders. And we're also looking at regular intervention. Well, a couple of our in-person folks are also using their own curriculum and their own progress monitoring that we meet with. We meet with folks. We meet with the folks on the campus about every 6 weeks or so.
And then Mindy, what are you using to make sure that your program continues to improve and get better over time?
Yeah. I think Horace made a great point too around storytelling and the importance of also just really capturing those moments with the students, with tutors, to really be able to just tell the transformational stories that happen as a result of tutoring. So yes, we use all the data that we've talked about regularly. We also pay a lot of attention to the health, the overall health of our tutoring force, and what their feelings are about the program, and whether or not they feel well supported in the work, whether or not they feel like they are learning, and whether or not they feel like they are also engaged in a movement to to create more equitable conditions for kids in schools, because that is a value that we lead with, and we want to ensure that they are feeling a part of a movement, and that literacy really is an equity issue. And so we have to capture the qualitative feedback on top of that, and are also stretch that out to our partners. We went from last year working with Uplift, like knowing how stretched teachers are right now, and school leaders, and we had like 30% of our school level contacts complete our surveys for us. We really dialed in on that one and decided we were going to really chase after those numbers, because we wanted more robust feedback from the schools. And so we're in the middle of those cycles right now too. I think when I checked on Friday, we were up closer to between 60 and 70% completion. So we're tracking that progress over time to make sure that we are getting the feedback to ensure we're able to respond and continue to improve the kind of work that we're doing with our schools.
I think this is a great place to wrap up. I think one of the things that I'm taking away from the four of you and from the conversation last week is that we continue to be in a place of learning, right? Mindy, your point, just great place, and we have to continue to get better at this because the work is never done to ensure that our students get the education that they deserve, right? And so I want to thank every single person who is viewing this webinar either right now or viewing it offline. Thank you for attending. Thank you for engaging us. Horace, Mindy, Nick, Sharon, thank you all for sharing your wisdom and expertise with us. And team from the campaign, Emily, thank you all for hosting this incredible conversation.
Thank you to everybody. Pete, thank you for your brilliant moderation and facilitation. Thanks to our incredible speakers. You all have been so enlightening. So thank you for your great ideas and really some important points driven home. And we just, before we close, want to remind everybody to please join us for future GLR Learning Tuesdays, including next week when we're going to be talking about first in a funder to funder conversation, investing in kindergarten as a sturdy bridge and philanthropic opportunities around that. And then at this time, building parent-centered ecosystems for out-of-school learning. The week after, join us for the Community Engagement Initiative, which is a framework for sustainable systemic change. Really exciting stuff coming up. So we hope you'll be back with us. And thank you again for joining us today. Thank you again to our incredible speakers and for this really wonderful learning opportunity. Take care, everybody.